right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back. We've passed the halfway point of our training, and we're so glad to have you back for another day. To start us out today, I'd just like to just make some space for you all to share any questions that you might have, any thoughts on the workshop so far, any questions that you may have had based off the panel on the first day, or just some of the information and content that we've delivered in the last day. So yeah, go ahead and share any kind of questions or thoughts in the chat, or feel free to come off mute. You're giving a lot of information to you all, so you're probably all still processing it. But if you do have a question, go ahead and share it in the chat. Our team will definitely be able to get you an answer. So moving on, today we're going to be continuing our deep dive into the remaining modules 3 and 4, and then wrapping it up with the conclusion. Throughout the day, you'll have plenty of time to brainstorm and connect with your state teams. So we'll make sure that you're able to get with those state teams and have a good amount of time with them. So before I pass it to Margot Hale, who's going to be going over module 3, wanted to just let you know that Tammy, my colleague, will be doing our closeout for the day. I'll be leaving a little early. And then in addition to that, just wanted to share that in celebration of Halloween and the last day of the workshop, we wanted to invite you all to maybe dress up in costume tomorrow if you're able and willing to. The state with the most team members who are dressed up will earn some big points for being good sports. So if you have a costume handy or a mask and you're not too embarrassed, go ahead and pull that out of the closet and get it ready for tomorrow. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Margot to get us started with module 3.
All right, thanks, Tomas, and good to be here with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, can y'all see that? Yes, okay, good. All right, so I am Margot Hale, and I am NCAT's Southeast Regional Director based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And here at NCAT, I do a lot of work with beginning farmers and military veterans, training them on starting and running successful farms. And so I work a lot with producers. And over the years, I have been the state supervisor for Food Corps Arkansas. And so I have done a lot of farm to school work related to Food Corps, and getting a chance to get to know child nutrition directors and see farm to school in action all across Arkansas and really all across the country. So I have been a part of this team that has developed this curriculum and developed these trainings since the beginning. And so today I'm going to share with you module 3. And so we'll just get right into it. So this module, well, the previous module, the modules you guys have learned about the last couple of days, help producers learn about and narrow down marketing channels for their products to enter schools. That's, what was covered yesterday. And this module will help producers have a better understanding of how their products fit onto the plate. And this module will help them determine the type of product that is a good fit with their chosen school market and their chosen market channel. And also this module explores whether any product adaptation will need to happen to meet the needs of the school buyers. So for module 3, the facilitator guide is on page 65 of your, the module 3 materials are on page 65 of your facilitator guide. And then in the producer workbook, that's on page 26. And you'll notice just a few differences between the outline of the facilitator guide and what is included in the producer workbook. And once again, this is similar to the other modules. The facilitator guide includes more details such as training materials, and then the suggested activities. And we're going to talk about all of those activities here in this lesson. On page 14 of the Facilitator Guide, you will find this map that provides a high-level overview of all of the content in Module 3. And so you can refer to this map to get acquainted with the materials in your Facilitator Guide. The activities and worksheets are also located in the Producer Workbook. So as you can see, this module contains 2 sections. And so I'm going to give you an overview of the sections and the activities and also the supplemental case studies. Module 2 discussed how meeting with a school nutrition director can help you identify the types of products and the volume requirements that schools are most likely to purchase. And in the first section of Module 3, we discuss how school cooking infrastructure and how a district's capacity, the feeding programs that they participate in, and other needs, how all of those things influence what types of products producers can sell to the district. So kind of going beyond just that initial contact with the child nutrition director, really understanding a school's capacities and how that affects the products that a producer might be able to sell. And then section B helps producers think about moving their product from field to school. So really, these are the main learning objectives for Module 3, really helping producers understand how their products can fit into school meal menus or just in the school in general, identifying those products that are a good fit based on the school's needs and capacities, and then how products can be adapted to meet those needs. This module just begins to introduce the idea about understanding product pricing and production cost. And that will be covered much more in depth in Module 4, which you'll hear from Andy here later today to go over that more in depth. But it is introduced in Module 3. So the background information for Module 3, this is found in the Facilitator Guide on page 65 and 66. And this includes the core concepts, some of those extra resources and case studies, and then the key terms. Section A of Module 3, we estimate it will take about 30 minutes to deliver this content. And so after you introduce the general topic and flow of Module 3, the first few slides of the module start discussing how to choose the right product based on the kitchen capacities of a district. And some producers may, they already may be selling to schools, and so be sure and bring that out. But some producers may have products in mind that they think they want to sell to a school, or they think that might be a good option. And so this is a good time to acknowledge that. And I think it's a good idea to have them kind of hold that product in mind as we proceed through the module and talk about some more of the specifics and some of the needs of the schools. And then once again, this is a good time to tie in the concepts that were taught in modules 1 and 2. Some of that information is really going to be relevant when thinking about a school's the programs they're participating in, how they are purchasing product, and the capacity that they have. So after you briefly discuss kitchen capacity and how to find a good product that fits based on that capacity, this slide shows producers how easy it is to look at a school district's menu to see if their product is a good fit. Advise producers that using a menu can be useful because schools typically prefer to directly substitute an item on their menu with a local version. So this is, a great opportunity to, there is a menu on the slides, but if you have local menus, depending on where you're holding your training, use those local menus as an example, and just have them look at it and say, like, okay, what products on this menu am I already growing or I could grow? And really helping producers understand, a little bit of that, menu planning and understanding kind of how food cycles work at a school. And we're basically repeating the same recipes and same foods, just repeating them week to week. And so helping them, pick out those products that might be a good fit. And also helping producers realize that, for the most part, school nutrition directors aren't going to be eagerly adding new items and really different things, at least not all the time or lots of them at one time. So easy substitution is the best place to start. So the next couple of slides talk about volume requirement and thinking, what the school needs. And, I know in module 2, we talked about kind of just learning the language of school food and, making sure producers understand that. And volume requirements are another place we're kind of having to switch a producer's mindset. And, they're used to harvesting product and, pounds or cases. And a school nutrition director is thinking along the lines of servings. And so how do we translate that? So I would tell them, encourage producers not to be intimidated by volume requirements. Oftentimes this is listed on a solicitation, or, a school nutrition director will work with a producer to help, make that translation of what they are harvesting and how that translates into the serving size. And encourage producers to consider translating that volume requirements from pounds to meals or servings. And there is a really good resource listed in the Facilitator Guide and Producer Workbook, the USDA School Food Buying Guide. And it works you through some examples of how to do that calculation and, determine the number of servings, based on pounds. So I'm not going to walk you through a math problem today. You get to do that with your producers when you do these trainings to help them understand how to do that conversion. The next few slides talk about different types of kitchens and cooking infrastructure. And I really explain how that will dictate the types of products and the level of processing a school district may need a product to be in order to purchase from a farmer. So, just shows different examples. And I will say this is another really good opportunity. If the kitchen capacity of some of your local schools or school districts, this is a good time to share that. So producers have an understanding of, what a school is able to do as far as cooking, processing, things like that. I do want to say, I know that typically salad bars have been a really great way to introduce local product into a school. It's an easy way to, if they have a local product, they can easily get that in there. Volume requirements aren't as important because we can put out what we have, and when it's used up, go back to something else. And I know during COVID, salad bars went away. And so that was besides everything else about how we feed our kids during the pandemic and school food that changed over the last couple of years, that is one thing that, I know went away from a lot of schools. So I do want to recognize that, but I think they're coming back. At least I know my daughter's middle school, their salad bar is back. So I just want to be cognizant of that fact. So the next slide talks about how certain crops will require a continuous harvest and others are a good fit for farm to school because they are one and done. And this is very much contingent on a school district's infrastructure and their storage capacity. So the picture on that slide is of some pallets of sweet potatoes. And so, this is a great a great product for a producer, because one big harvest and they can deliver it to a school, one payment, and they're, not worrying about delivering or harvesting or all of those things. And so that's a great option if a school district has the storage capacity to, store pallets of sweet potatoes and use them throughout the fall and winter. And also just the processing of, we're not putting whole sweet potatoes on kids' trays most likely. And so that product also requires a little bit of processing and, and cooking to serve. So once again, understanding a school's capacities can dictate what types of products would be a good fit for them. And then the final slide in this section includes tips for producers that are just getting started in school sales, and helping them realize, not all products and not all farmers will, respond to a solicitation and get product in a school menu. But there are a lot of other ways that we can get local product into schools. So, very small purchases, micro purchases, special meals or events like Harvest of the Month, taste tests, and classroom lessons. So, it doesn't just have to be getting our product featured in a menu item. It can be a lot of other ways that producers get their food into their schools. And oftentimes these other ways are kind of the way farmers get their foot in the door and start that relationship with a school. So the next slide includes an excerpt from one of our full case studies. And I'm going to play this excerpt for you in just a moment. But this is an example of one of the case studies in this lesson. And Alan Marachek is the Child Nutrition Director at Fayetteville Public Schools here in Arkansas. And she provides some tips to producers on approaching and working with a school nutrition director. So just a moment, and I'm going to share that video.
Yeah, well, I would say number one, bring samples. You will have, a lot more luck with the child nutrition director when you bring them something tasty to eat, and also so you can showcase how different the flavor might be, or bring some different varieties that maybe they've never seen before. They're used to seeing that from their brokers, so to kind of align with that would be great. Also, come to the conversation knowing what you need for your farm operation. Just so that they can plan accordingly, and you can decide together whether it's a good market for your operation. Mm-hmm. So probably the quickest and most simple explanation for how we manage purchasing relationships with growers is through a bid process, and the type of bidding you do depends on how much you're likely going to buy from the grower. But we have early conversations, and we are allowed to share previous pricing or current pricing with the grower, so they can see if that pricing is going, something similar might work for their business, and then they can decide whether they participate in our bidding solicitation, all of that we're required to do. So you can have initial conversations about price before that happens. You can't tell them the price to put down, but it's just, it's open information that anyone could request. And we primarily purchase directly from growers. We have a district warehouse that we can receive the items at, so the growers make one delivery, but we do very little local purchasing through a distributor or other sort of third party. It's direct from the producer.
Okay, let me get back to the presentation. So that is just an excerpt of a longer case study that's available. We have both video and written case study from Allie, and all throughout this curriculum, we have a lot of really great case studies to help explain these concepts and provide some really great examples. Okay, I think I'm back for the presentation now. All right, so the next part of Module 3 is an activity. And this applied activity is the school menu brainstorm. And so you'll have the opportunity to spend some time looking at a menu, either in the producer workbook. There's a few examples of menus at the back of the producer workbook. Or once again, consider bringing a menu from your state or your region, or, you know, even better, some different menus. So producers can see the variety in menus and types of products that different schools serve. So plan on having producers spend about 10 minutes brainstorming which products might be a good fit or substitute for menu items. They can look at menus and identify products that they are already producing or could produce. So this activity, you know, we introduced school menus at the beginning of this module, and this is a time to really let them kind of look at these menus and do some brainstorming and think about things that they could be growing and selling to schools. Okay, so that was all of Section A of Module 3. Section B focuses on how producers can alter their products if needed to meet school cooking or processing limitations, or just to meet the needs of the school as discussed in Section A. Trainers will help producers understand different types of processing, from a raw product, so from, for example, raw carrots, to light processing such as carrot coins, to a high value added product such as parboiled, dried, or frozen product. Another important point we want trainers to make in this section is that it can be expensive to add processing infrastructure to a farm. So it might be a better option to connect with regional processing centers or other buyers that might do the processing for you. And then for those producers that are interested in investing in infrastructure, there are a few slides on financing and funding for farmers so that they can retrofit their operation or add some of that minimal processing on the farm. So anyone that works with producers at all, you know, the most common question they have is, you know, are there grants or how can I pay for that? So we do include a little bit of information on that. And then finally, the last section gets producers to start thinking about considering the cost of getting their farm product to the buyer. So in this section, you'll start off by reminding producers that the school capacity will dictate the types of products and the level of processing required. Once again, just like we covered in the first section of Module 3, you know, the school needs, the school capacity is really going to dictate the types of products that they're able to purchase. So here is a good time to ask producers to think about the capacity discussion in Section A and how this might affect processing. The slides 19 and 20 here discuss light processing, mainly of fruits and vegetables, and what that level of processing means exactly. And through an initial meeting with a child nutrition director, producers can ask about processing capacity and cooking infrastructure at schools. You know, some schools have the capacity and equipment to do some processing and work that into their regular workflow and do processing at different times and are able to, you know, process and store processed product. And other schools don't have that capacity at all. So once again, we have to understand a school's capacity in order to understand what types of products that they could buy. The next couple of slides discuss processing for meat and other high value added products such as pre-cooked fruits and vegetables. And really, these products require extensive infrastructure and are probably best left to a processing kitchen or a meat processor. As trainers, it will be helpful to be familiar with state or regional examples of value-added processing and financing. So producers are likely going to have questions about processing rules and regulations. And, processing rules vary from state to state and even, county to county of what is allowed, on a farm or what needs to be done in a licensed kitchen or processing center. So be familiar with those regulations, what they are in your state or your area. And then also, be familiar with processing options in your area. So there are lots of options for regionalization in these slides. And, Andrea, I saw your question at the very beginning of like thinking about how you'll make this training relevant for your small rural producers. And I think throughout this module, there are opportunities for that, using examples from your local school of, what their menu is, and understanding what their kitchen capacity is and what capacity they have to buy local products, knowing if there are local or regional processing facilities, if there is a licensed kitchen where a farm can do any value-added processing, or those who are livestock producers, what are the local or regional livestock processing capabilities. That's I know a big challenge for livestock producers, small livestock producers all across the country, is having access to inspected processing facilities. So just being aware and making sure you are, pulling out those local examples and, helping tailor this information to meet the needs of those, rural farmers, those rural producers, which is, very common across the board. So, thinking through regional processing kitchens in your area, and this is a great place to highlight farm to school grantees in your state or your region, especially if there are grantees who are using funds for processing, for adding value, doing value-added processing, or, adding processing to a school kitchen or something like that. This is a great opportunity to highlight them and share their successes. And then finally, mention to producers that adding value is not just through processing, and have them start thinking about how their products add value beyond processing. And here in a few slides, we're going to do an activity related to this. But, providing local product and being a local producer, there are all sorts of additional values that a producer can provide to a school that, getting a product off of a distributor truck that can't provide. So have them think about other ways they add value. Slide 26 talks about the importance of timing and how schools and producers need to consider timing for, sales and for processing. There is another video clip of one of our case studies featuring Glenn Holmes. And I'm not going to play that clip for you, but do know that you can find this video and other related case studies with all of the Facilitator materials. And so Mr. Holmes talks about timing. He talks about capacity and working with other local entities to help expand that capacity. He talks about finding, cooler storage space. And so if a school doesn't have it, maybe somewhere else locally has that capacity and can work with the farmer and the school so that they're able to sell product into the school. Okay. The next few slides walk producers through some of the costs to consider in doing even minimal processing. And, it's not just cost of money, but time and other things as well for producers to think about if they're considering adding some processing to their farm or getting some value-added processing done to their product in order to sell it. There's another producer spotlight that features meat processing. And so if you are working with a group of livestock producers, that would be a great video to show and to share that case study with your growers. And you can pick and choose the spotlights, based on your audience. We have lots of really good case studies in module 3. And so choose the ones that are relevant to your audience. Once again, Andrea, that's a great opportunity to make the training applicable to those small rural growers. And then finally, slide 30 features a list of potential grant and low interest loan funds for investing in infrastructure and processing capacity on a producer's farm. And this information is also available in the producer's workbook in the Digging Deeper section. So once again, if you work with producers, they're going to ask about the funding and where they can get money to do something. So there is a little bit of information there. And then there's a few more producer spotlight videos that you can pick and choose or play all of them. All right, the next part of the module is another applied activity, and we are going to do this activity. So in this activity, you will ask producers to turn to their neighbor and give them a values pitch. So what sets their product apart from a wholesale distributor? And, so when you're doing this training, you'll have producers, get in pairs or small groups and have them give each other their values pitch about what sets them apart, what makes their product better than the rest. And so now we're going to take a few minutes and we are going to break you guys up into groups and you're going to practice a values pitch. So I don't know if we have any producers here in the training today, but if you're a producer yourself, you can share your values pitch, or you can think about the producers that you work with, the producers in your state. What are some of the things that they can say to a school that they can show that they are adding value, and the things that they can do and provide to a school that they won't get off a distributor truck? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and for now, because we're going to break into groups. So now is your chance to share out what you guys said in your breakouts as what would be a values pitch. What are some of those things that your producers can say that they are bringing value to a school? So feel free to come off mute and share that or put it in the chat. I think probably make sure you say what state you're from so we can make sure you're getting some credit for it. Okay, Amy, your hand is raised. Oh, and Aubrey. Okay, we'll start with Amy. She's the first hand I saw, and then we'll go to Aubrey.
I was just explaining to my partner that we, since our kids are the producer of our beef and since our school raises it, a big pitch for our community, which would be opposites, is that they know exactly what the intake is of the beef. They know that it is prairie hay. They know all the feeds and all the nutrition that go into it. So that has been a really big sales pitch. And when we use it for our concession stand for the community, then the kids that run the concession stand know exactly like the ingredients in the tomatoes, because those are fresh, and the beef. And so the only additives we can tell them in our recipe are the things that we bought from the store. So that's a really good sales pitch for us, is that we know everything that's in our recipe.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Amy, what state are you in?
Kansas.
Okay. Well, and if your students are anything like my daughters, when we're eating dinner, they'll say like, hey, is this so-and-so? And they remember the name of what cow or pig that was. So
yes, that's exactly how our students are. They're like, is this from? And I'm like, kind of.
Yeah, that might not be a selling point for most people in the general public, but the kids do know where their food comes from. Thanks for sharing, Amy. Okay, Aubrey.
Awesome. We talked about like education value. So providing like virtual tours or educational videos that show where it's grown and some of the information about, as well as like different varieties that they're unfamiliar with, and potentially helping them develop their own like herb garden or something like that for their own educational production at their school.
Yeah, awesome. Those farmers can be a great source of education and, helping build out some of those lesson plans and making those connections between the food and the curriculum they're learning. So that's really good. Thanks, Aubrey. Okay. Aubrey, state?
Montana.
I knew that. But whoever's keeping notes might not have. All right, Rhonda.
Well, we wanted talk about the educational aspect, but also making it fun. And all three of us were more gardener type produce. And how can you bring that into things like artwork? Getting the kids engaged in touching, feeling, of making sure they understand how it grew, but then we got off on milkweed actually, and what can you do with milkweed, and getting the monarch caterpillars involved with the science projects, things like that. So I think just engaging the kids face to face with the producer is helpful for them to realize where their food is coming from.
Absolutely. And it also makes them want to eat that food that's served on their tray if they've met the person that grew it. So very good. Okay. And just scanning through the comments, I see several really good comments. Kids, want to know where their food comes from, and that producer's story is important. Understanding how the product was raised, whether it's, raised with organic practices, and let's see, local products, food miles. Local farmers can offer different varieties and presenting them in different ways. And let's see, production practices, different varieties, plus cover crops. So the producers can share the other ways that they are, taking care of their land and other local environment, and how they're helping their community in other ways. Okay, let's see. Man, you guys have some really good answers. Yeah, farmers market carrots from October into May. So just showing them the shelf life of those really fresh local products. Absolutely. Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much for doing that activity. You can keep putting things here in the chat, and the scorekeeper will keep adding points to your for your state. And thanks so much for participating in that. And hopefully that helped you kind of see how you could facilitate that discussion with your producers at a training. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share back my screen. Okay, so the next couple of slides talk about pricing and helping producers think about pricing for their products. And this is a great time, to talk with producers, make sure that they understand that, some products are a good fit for farm to school and others are not. So, not every product is going to be a good fit for the school market. And that can be for a variety of reasons, but price is often one of those reasons. So finding some of those products that have a lower production cost, those products are going to be a better fit for school markets. So thinking about those products and how they can fit into the school menu. And once again, we're just introducing this topic here, and module 4 is going to do a deeper dive, but it's really, really important for producers to know their cost of production, so that they know their products that have low input cost and would be a better fit for a school market. So once again, Andy's going to talk more about that, but As someone, as I, said, I work with producers a lot, and there's a lot that goes into understanding their production cost, and record keeping is a big part of that. And, most producers are not super great at that part of farming. So, but it is really important for making these decisions about what products to sell into a school. The final activity in Module 3 is modeled after the Washington Department of Ag's product planning chart. And so this is found on page 32 of the producer workbook. And, producers can fill this out, and it prompts them to think about all the steps involved in moving their product to the school. So, one, identifying what is the need of the school, and what product or how this product can meet that need of the school. And then, if there is any further processing that's needed, and how that might, the steps that need to happen to, make that take place. So it just helps producers kind of think through all of those steps of moving their product, from the farm into the school. Okay, so this slide prompts producers to look at case studies of farmers selling through the channels described in this module. Once again, that's the link for the case studies. You can use the case studies, the ones that make sense for your producer training, whether determining what group of farmers you're working with, or any specific needs they have. You can use those case studies. And then once again, if you have local examples, farmers in your state who are selling into schools, definitely use them as your case studies, or use them to help provide this training. That will be most impactful for other producers. And then finally, the action planning check-in is for trainers to review and ask producers to reflect on those essential questions. And for Module 3, these questions are on page 55 of the Facilitator guide. And these questions include, have the farmers identified products that they are producing or could start producing that would be a good fit for schools? And do the producers understand how the products could be processed, or if they need to be processed in order to meet school demand? And then beginning to understand how they can price the product. So the price that they need to receive in order to make sure it works for them in their farm business. And then finally, as I've said throughout, there are lots of opportunities for regionalization throughout this module. So using those local school menus, and providing the local farm to school contacts, and using those local or regional school profiles, and then also, highlighting different processing that's available in your region. So if you're, familiar with a local processing kitchen, or community kitchen where producers can use in order to do value-added processing. Any examples like that are really good to provide that regionalization and that personalization for the growers in your state or in your region. And then once again, make sure to look at all those past farm to school grantees and find the ones that are in your state or in your region, and use them, highlight them, ask them to come participate in your training, especially if there's those that have used their funds to do some value-added processing, or add processing to their kitchens to increase that capacity. Okay. So that's all I have for you. I'm happy to take any questions, or if you have any questions, if you think of anything afterwards, there is my contact information. And yeah. All right. Well, Tomas, I think I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Margot, for going over that entire module for us. So we're going to transition into our first breakout session for the day. And I think Carlos is going to get that queued up for you all. Let's see. Yes, we have about maybe a little bit over 20 minutes in this session. So go ahead and join your teams, and then we'll come back and jump into our first break.
All right, folks, we're gonna get started here with Andy Pressman, my colleague from New Hampshire, and he is going to go over Module 4. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over to you, Andy.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tammy, and hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today, and I hope you're enjoying the training so far. As Tammy mentioned, my name's Andy, and I work with Tammy, Carlos, and Margot with the National Center for Appropriate Technology, and I am located in New Hampshire. And I have the pleasure of introducing you all to Module 4 today of the curriculum, which is geared towards producers. And as Margot highlighted the importance of knowing your costs of production, this module focuses on the planning and production aspects of selling to schools, which, as you know, is critical for success and in managing towards goals as well as through challenges, as we've seen with the pandemic. And through my work with NCAT, I have the privilege of working with producers who sell to schools. Much of my work involves working with producers on whole farm planning, which was introduced to you all on Monday, as well as production planning and understanding the relationships between farm equipment and infrastructure and current and future scales of production. And this is all part of the foundation of Module 4. And I just want to warn you, it's a big module. And as we start to dive into it, keep in mind that several of the topics or sections in the module may work better for you and your producers being taught as standalone trainings. And I'll mention this a few times throughout the presentation this afternoon. All right, so let's get started here. So just like with all the modules, Module 4 contains the business and production planning portion of this training, and what we're looking at is the map of the module. You can see the facilitator resources for Module 4 starting on page 79 of your facilitator guide, and the producer workbook page 33 as well. And as I mentioned, Module 4 focuses on whole farm business planning, considerations for scaling up for school markets, crop and livestock planning and production, and food safety considerations and regulations. There are a lot of tools and resources identified in this module that can help producers evaluate school markets and whether or not schools are a good fit for their farms. And as I just mentioned a minute ago about the opportunity to utilize sections of this module as standalone trainings, it's also important to consider your producer training team for this module. If your team is strong on the procurement side, for example, but perhaps not as experienced on training producers on the principles of farm business and financial management, you may need to pull in someone who is skilled at teaching these topic areas. And the same goes for food safety as well. All right, so on pages 15 through 16 of your facilitator guide, you can see the full curriculum outlined. As with all the training modules, you can see these outlines to get a quick glance at the core content and concepts for each module, the learning objectives, and training activities to help producers reinforce the information. You can see in column 4, hopefully you can see it's a little bit blurry, that this module is heavy on applied activities that include worksheets in the producer workbook and in familiarizing and utilizing several online resources that we're going to be pointing out in the next 40 minutes or so. All right, and the learning objectives for Module 4, which are listed on your screen here, we want farmers to understand and assess their capacity for school sales. We want to further explore price point and the return on investment as related to selling to schools. We want producers to understand some of the infrastructure that might be required for certain school districts and to understand how to plan and move the product from the field to the cafeteria. And if you turn now to page 80 in your facilitator guide, or which is also shown on the screen here, you'll see the list of core concepts included in this module. And the core concepts align with the producer learning objectives and include business, financial, and production planning, as well as food safety, all through the filter of school sales. As I mentioned, there are a lot of resources on production planning and enterprise analysis, and we encourage you to look at these and perhaps find state-specific resources if available. The resources that we have included are embedded links, which are listed here, as well as Appendix A, which I believe is, looks like page 109 of the facilitator guide. All right, and so on that note, is everyone ready to sort of dive into the sections? All right, well, starting off, we are at section A. This is the business planning for school sales section. It is intended to help producers understand if selling to schools is a good choice for their farm business and their family and farm goals. So it reviews the whole farm planning process of selling to schools that was presented on in the introduction of this training. And we want to encourage producers to work with enterprises and markets that support their desired quality of life and holistic goals. Selling to school markets requires producers to be proactive in their planning and to understand, as Margot mentioned, their costs of production. So if things don't look profitable on paper in the planning process, then there's a good chance that they won't be if and when they're implemented. So we'll be reviewing a few of the tools to assist producers in this decision-making process over the next several minutes. And we're going to start off with slide 5, which is on page 82 of the facilitator guide. And this is just a review and a prompt for producers to review some of the factors that affect how a product fits into a school menu. It's also to help gauge if their goals still align with this based on what they've learned so far in the training and through the other 3 modules. So this includes things like evaluating price point, different types of marketing channels, and whether school markets work well for a producer's personality, interests, business mission, and their current and future systems of production. And continuing now with slides 6 through 9. These slides here focus on business planning and financial tools for producers. And here we want to help producers understand how to calculate the break-even price of their products and their return on investment, or ROI, when accessing school markets. And I would like to highlight that this is especially important if changes to systems and infrastructure are needed on the farm. There are numerous models and software programs available for farmers to help them with business and financial planning, as well as record keeping, and many of which we've identified in the workbooks and on the project website for this training. So many producers should already have an idea, but this is an opportunity to give them more of a clear understanding of production costs, as well as their break-even price point and the time frame for their return on investment. And we want to emphasize the importance of creating a cash flow statement, which is critical for farms to align their monthly expenses and their gross sales with the school year or a school's payment terms. And these slides in the corresponding producer workbook on page 35, again, include a series of resources to help make these calculations. And now we've come to the next slide, which is our first producer spotlight or case study. And this one is with Kat Becker from Cattail Organics, which is located in Wisconsin. And I have to be honest that the audio quality is not great. However, the information that Kat shares provides such a great insight into price point. And she mentions that in this podcast recording that they first considered trying to compete with distributors on their pricing. But as a result of good record keeping on cost of production and in understanding the profitability of each crop that they grow on their farm, they have since moved away from this strategy. Now, knowing what they need to charge at a minimum, the farm's prices would be considered high by wholesale standards. But catch this, Kat mentions that the food service directors are happy to pay more because there's less waste. And she uses lettuce as an example where baby lettuce mix is sold at $7 a pound, but virtually none of the product is thrown away. And the food service director that she works with has said they can expect to throw away anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of a product from a distributor. So as such, Kat suggests that this is something to consider when trying to distinguish a farm's product from products that the food service director currently purchases from a distributor. And then following the producer spotlight, we have a applied activity. And this one should take roughly about 15 minutes. And with this applied activity, we want producers to work in groups with similar enterprises to use some of the tools linked in the presentation in order to help find their cost of production and break-even price for specific enterprises. So keep in mind that scale of production plays a vital role in figuring out cost of production and in meeting a school's volume requirements. This is very back of the envelope calculations, and with more time in your trainings, producers may be able to do a deeper dive into things like labor costs and whether the farm is at a scale that can take advantage of wholesale prices and purchasing inputs for production, such as seed costs, fertilizer and soil amendments, livestock feed, all of which can have a significant impact on a farm's operating expenses. And with this applied activity, we have the worksheet that is on page 36 of the producer workbook. And as I just mentioned, we're focused on things, what I would refer to as fixed and variable costs. And I just want to point out, if any producers seem overwhelmed as they start to think about some of these costs, it may be good to remind them that developing enterprise or crop or livestock budgets can be challenging and may take several years to develop, especially if you have multiple enterprises or multiple crops, which is fairly common with diversified farms who are probably growing several different types of vegetables at once. So, you know, it may not be that they're going to figure this out for every crop right off the bat, but maybe if they can work on 1 or 2 crops starting off and each year sort of build off of that. But this is why record keeping is so critical. And also in regards to planning costs, I want to mention that there's always unexpected costs that are usually not considered in an operating budget or in developing a budget. And so I encourage you all to help point out that these costs should be included in a budget. And I've seen all sorts of numbers to sort of compensate for this. And it's usually listed as something referred to as a contingency line item. But more commonly in my experience, I see about 20% of the overall operating budget to sort of put in as this contingency line item to cover all those unexpected costs, which there's always several. 20% may seem high when I normally talk to farmers and ranchers about that. They sort of are shocked by that high of a number. But once we start, you know, penciling it out and looking at their expenses and how they operate, this tends to be a pretty accurate number. And I would also sort of urge folks to be caution, you know, that I'd rather account for it and save that money versus, you know, in my planning process, not having it and then finding out I'm still short on my funds. I've also seen producers, instead of taking a percentage of their overall operating budget, attach a specific maintenance cost to individual purchases regarding infrastructure and equipment per year. So for example, if I'm going to buy a $20,000 greenhouse this year, I may put in maybe 10% of the purchase price, so $2,000 each year in my operating costs to cover all the routine maintenance and any expenses that I just don't account for in my operating budget. All right, so that was quick, but that is a sort of the overview of section A. And as we sort of move on to the next sections, again, it's important to keep in mind that these sections could be used as a separate training to really do a deep dive into these topics, depending on the audience. And so now we're going to shift towards section B, which focuses on scaling up production for school markets. And here we're starting with slides 13 through 14, where we discuss how different market channels will affect the scale needed to meet the demand of the market, and how important it is to ensure the farm is solid in its production skills before scaling up to sell to schools. One way to do this is by evaluating and identifying the weakest link that is preventing the farm from succeeding or managing towards its goals. This is an opportunity to really look into the root of a problem. Most often when we think about the farm goal, it's a financial goal that a farm is targeting and managing towards. But through whole farm planning, farmers can identify other goals to manage towards. There is a saying you may be familiar with: farm for profit, not for production. As you know, farmers are constantly battling things that impact their operations and how they manage towards their targeted revenues. And most of these challenges can be mitigated so that production is still happening while these challenges are being addressed. However, the weak link is more about the one thing that, until it is addressed, the farm really can't move forward. And this is important in understanding the relationship between scales of production and selling to schools. And so we're going to discuss this a bit more in a few minutes, as we have an applied activity at the end of this section that is designed to help producers evaluate their weak link. And in slides 15 through 17, you can help producers here understand some of the factors that may or may not lead to success when scaling up to sell to schools. Certainly, labor is an important consideration and one of the biggest expenses for a farm business. I'd recommend spending a little extra time on this and perhaps consider adding in an extra slide or two and some discussion around your state labor laws, as well as the HR and accounting systems that must be in place no matter what scale a producer is at or how many employees they have. I'd also like to add that as educators and technical service providers, we like to stress that a farm or any business should be profitable where they're currently at before considering scaling up. However, in my experience in working with producers, I tend to find that most farmers scale up in order to manage towards profitability. And those that sort of navigate through the risks involved tend to understand their goals and that they have some type of business plan that not only details the financials of the business, but it's designed to work as a filter for making business decisions, especially when considering scaling up. So also note on slide 16, which has the laying hens there are sort of 4 components listed. It says scaling up will affect. I sort of look at those 4 components as sort of the definition of scaling up, that we tend to think of it as increasing acreage, but it can also be taking on more enterprises or more crops. It could also be increasing herd size, as well as taking on more markets. And one thing that is not listed there that I like to point out is just being more efficient and better within a farm's current systems that will in turn increase yields and increase profitability. This may not just be production related, but perhaps just doing a better job at record keeping, for payroll, for setting up appropriate channels for communications with farm workers. So lots to consider there. That again, it's not just about increasing something on the farm, whether it's acreage or number of enterprises or markets, but it could just, again, be more efficient at where they're currently at. And next we have slides 18 through 20. And these slides focus on school-specific considerations for scaling up, including school requirements for consistency and quality, and in how items are prepared, packaged, and labeled. And these considerations are so important for successful relationships in farm to school, while I also want to stress the importance of having clear communication channels between all parties. This may require certain systems be in place for communicating these aspects, but I'm not just talking about communications in terms of what's available, how to place an order, and in setting up deliveries, but more importantly for things like product traceability and in being prepared for any potential recalls that must be conducted. And on that note, that sort of guides us into the focus on risk management and the risk of scaling up, including managing federal food safety requirements if the farmers move beyond the allowed exemptions, and in meeting school liability insurance requirements. Specifically, we're talking about product liability insurance, which protects farmers against people who may claim to suffer illness, injury, or loss due to the product the farmer sold them, and in our purposes, through the school. Schools generally require that farmers carry product liability insurance, and that it's usually between the range of $1 million to $5 million. And this, on average, costs the farmer anywhere from about $500 to $1,500 a year, respectively. I would also add that risk management should be included in the farm's business plan. This is a proactive approach versus being reactive when certain issues arise. And other components that should be considered under risk management in a business plan may include dealing with climate change and the impacts it may have on yields, as well as what happens to the farm in the case that it doesn't survive. And this latter is directly related to the type of business the farm is structured under, such as a sole proprietorship, an LLC, a nonprofit, and so on. And as we wrap up this section, here we're looking at slide 23. It's important to remind producers that scaling up requires careful cost calculations in order to understand the rate of return and to see if it pencils out. It may be valuable to have a conversation about scaling up for multiple wholesale or intermediary market channels and not just for school sales. Also, there are several wonderful trainings, such as one called Wholesale Success, which is by Atina Diffley and the Family Farmed organization, that could also support this section. All right, and getting back to the weak link discussion, we next have an applied activity for this section, which is worksheet 4B on page 39 of the producer workbook. As I previously stated, the goal for a producer is to identify the one and only one weak link on their farm that is holding them back in their current or future production for school sales. All the other challenges or barriers that a producer identifies, we can consider as adverse factors, and while they're problems, they can be addressed while still working within the school markets. And so I really like this quote here by Alan Savory and Jody Butterfield. One and only one weakest link accounts for the strength of the entire chain, regardless of how strong other links might be. To strengthen a chain, one must always attend first to the weakest link. Other links, or as I mentioned, the adverse factors, no matter how frail they appear, are essentially non-problems until the weakest link is first fixed. So this is an opportunity to stress the importance for producers to monitor their decisions and progress throughout the season. This can allow for any quick in-season adjustments that may be needed so as to not jeopardize the contract a producer has with the school. And so think about how producers who had school contracts at the start of COVID had to adapt. So at this time, let's take a few moments for you all to think about and write down some weak links that either you've experienced in working with a producer who is already selling to schools, or that could be a future weak link as they seek out school markets. So we'll take maybe a minute here, and if you want to just think about some of the weak links that you've come across, and then we can share some of them. All right, I see a few of you using the chat, which is great. And Deb has time and cost of delivery, which to me, that really stands out to sort of the discussion that we previously talked about in Module 3 as related to the components of having rural farms and rural schools. That time component to me is really critical as it relates into figuring out costs of production. So we have cold storage, we have not being able to supply enough product for an entire school contract. We have farmers who prefer to do things casually and not want to provide invoices and W-9s. Yes. We have cold storage, transportation, consistency in production, transportation again. Yeah, produce coming in really dirty, where cooks are not happy and have to spend a lot of time prepping it before they can use it. So Carlos, I don't know if you're keeping points, but somehow if we want to give anyone in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourselves if you have others that you want to share. Feel free to do so. Margaret saying land access, which is a huge barrier. All right, well, all these are really great. And I just want to point out that what one of you may have identified as a weak link could be an adverse factor for someone else. So it's very specific to your situations and to the producers you're working with. All right. Well, hopefully that sort of clarifies the weakest link component, and that finishes out section B of module 4. So as we're cruising along here, we're now up to section C, which focuses on crop planning. And obviously it should be used only if you have an audience comprised of crop producers. The next section, section D, is geared towards livestock production. And so definitely we encourage you to pick and choose these parts of the curriculum based on the types of producers who are at your trainings and who you work with. And if you have a composition of both, perhaps consider breaking into groups by enterprise type, which could really help strengthen peer-to-peer learning. And to me, the more opportunities for peer-to-peer learning, the better the training. So again, sort of going back to the rule component and question that was asked. Here's a great producer spotlight that is next, and this is Living Root Farm, which is located in Montana. And this farm works with a small rural school district to sell into their salad bar program. I know Margot mentioned that at her kids' school, the salad bar has recently opened. I know at my kids' school, salads are still being served in clamshells. But schools, you know, for this producer spotlight, schools are only one of the farm's marketing outlets, which I like to point out in terms of risk management and diversifying marketing channels. I think the take-home message with this spotlight and this case study is that it focuses on the Van Orders who run Living Root Farm, and how they talk about planning for crop successions or crop relays as a tool to make sure that the dollars and cents line up to meet their obligations. And as also relating back to making sure, as someone put in the chat regarding weakest links, that there's a consistent supply to meet the school contract. All right, so now we have slides 27 through 29. And here we dig into how to use school contracts and agreements to develop a crop plan. As with enterprise or financial planning, production planning is critical in meeting the needs of the school market. It involves first understanding the needs of the school and then working backwards all the way through the production process in order to figure out the what, when, where, and how the producer will meet the needs of the school. For example, on my family's farm, we start with the delivery or market date, and then we work backwards to figure out when to harvest, how long a crop is in the field for, when it is seeded or transplanted in the field, where it is planted in the field, and when it needs to be started in the greenhouse, which even goes back further to helping us figure out how much seed we have to order. As I mentioned a few times already, if it doesn't work on paper preseason, then chances are it won't work in the field. That is to say, it pays to plan. And keep in mind that planning helps manage risks. Crop growers need to plan for things like crop loss, while livestock producers may have challenges associated with processing dates and the impacts this can have on the weight of an animal. All right, so I mentioned throughout this module, we do refer to several tools and resources for producers. And we're going to start with one here for crop planning. This one is called Ag Decision Maker, and it was developed by Craig Chase at Iowa State University Extension. And this tool is designed for producers to evaluate marketing outlets using whole farm records. And whole farm records are the types of records a farmer uses to sort of set up their chart of accounts based on the IRS Schedule F, which is what the farmer needs to fill out for taxes each year. And so they can be used to evaluate various marketing outlets, especially when a producer may not have the detailed information they have on cost of production for a specific crop or enterprise. So here producers can use this spreadsheet to evaluate different market outlets based on their potential contribution to the overall farm net income. The next tool we'd like to showcase is from Johnny Selected Seeds up in Maine, and it's on their website. And if you're not familiar with Johnny Selected Seeds, at least their website, it has a really great growers library that can be, it's filled with several great resources and videos for crop planning. And Tammy's gonna bring it up here and we're gonna sort of walk through some of the components. All right, so as you can see, she's first on their website, and then there's the growers library. And under the growers library is a section called planning tools and calculators. And they include, as you can see, calculators for things like seed starting and transplanting dates, succession planting, and harvest dates. And keep in mind that harvest dates are the starting point for crop planting, as we just talked about. And that involves sort of working backwards to planting and seed starting. And so I think we're going to bring up the succession planting calculator. As we mentioned, sort of having these successions or relays is just critical, making sure there's a consistent supply to sell to schools and to meet contracts. So in looking at this, there's sort of two general ways that succession planning can be achieved. One is through taking the same variety of a crop and staggering the planting dates. The other option is to take the same crop, but a different variety that has a different day to maturity, and then planting those at the same time so that they're harvested at different dates. So for example, Ace red peppers take 70 days to mature, while the variety Olympus takes 85 days. And so looking at this spreadsheet, see if I can enlarge it a little bit. So basically you can put all the varieties in that you'd like in that first big column, but you also have to know the days to maturity, which you can find from any seed packet or seed catalog. And then also you can either keep what Johnny's already has in the calculator or create your own, but you have to know the interval between the days. So what those successions look like, which is again, is based on your markets. But what's real important here is to focus, what I just saw Tammy do, is the option to put in a fall frost date, which I see Tammy's putting one in. So September 15th, that must be Montana. But what this calculator allows you to,
It is.
so ours is about September 26th, although we just had our first frost in New Hampshire last week, a few days ago. So by putting in this frost date, it's really important because then it computes that final planting date, which Tammy's hovering over there in that last column. So that's really critical because otherwise, and you could change whenever you want that first planting date in that first planting column. But once you do that, it just calculates each of the other plantings while incorporating that frost date, which is really important because without it, it's going to give you dates that in your region farmers can't plant then and actually get a crop from. All right, hopefully Hopefully that all makes sense. And again, just another great resource on the Johnny's website, along with all of their other great calculators and videos as well for growers. All right, we could bring up the slide deck. All right, thanks, Tammy. So we finish up this section with an applied activity. And so section C, the activity focuses on crop planning, and it starts with a bid sheet exercise that is then to be used to complete a crop plan for one crop. So it gives an example of using carrots that starts with the production goal, which would be based off the quantity a school needs for the product. And then it shows the process of working backwards to figure out how much to plant and how much space is required in the field. And this is on page 42 of the producer workbook. All right, everyone doing okay? No, it's a lot of information. All right, so the next section, we just finished up crops. And then section D focuses on livestock and animal protein products and the planning aspects for school sales. And this starts on page 93 of the Facilitator guide. And this section actually starts with an applied activity, one that I really like. And this one allows you to engage with producers to evaluate how their products fit on the school plate. And this activity allows the producers to share about their experiences and what products work best for school sales, while also allowing you to put a gauge on the room and where the producers are at. So there's some facilitator prompts, but again, it's just a really great opportunity to have producers in your training share about their experience. All right, so diving into this section, which are slides 33 through 37. Here, livestock producers will focus on school menus and in determining portion sizes for their protein products. The key concepts here focus on versatility and costs. And as Margot talked about in Module 3, a school's capacity and needs will dictate how much and in what form the livestock product will take. And for example, we have to figure out, does the school have freezer storage? Then we want producers to think about production planning and to have you all share some tools for determining production capacity and profitability. And one thing to note is that livestock producers will tell you how important it is to have several months to a year's advance notice of the quantity required to sell to schools. And this is critical for scheduling processing dates, which are set far in advance and continue to be a barrier all throughout the country. And one of the tools we want to highlight for the livestock planning portion is one called Compass Tools. It's actually part of a set of downloadable spreadsheets. And this is created by the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems, John Hendrickson at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and his team and colleagues. And these tools help farmers actively manage for increased farm profits by helping them understand their cost of production by product and by market channel. And like most planning tools, farmers can use this data to make strategic decisions. And I also, as you can see on the top here, while we're highlighting this under the livestock portion of the training, the Compass Toolbox also includes a spreadsheet for vegetables as well as organic grains. And slide 38 is the final slide in this section, and it touches on egg production. This is a topic you may want to expand on depending upon the interests of the producer audience. This is also a great opportunity to consider using examples of local eggs in schools that you can elevate from your state and your region. My understanding is that many schools use liquid eggs or processed egg products, so the transition to buying fresh local eggs can be challenging. From a producer aspect, adding eggs to an existing farm may not be too hard to implement, and it can provide additional income or profit streams, assuming a producer can get their expenses, and we're primarily talking about feed costs here, low enough to meet the school's price point. And this section finishes up on slide 39 with another applied activity. And this one here is very similar to the crop production planning activity, but here we're using beef as an example, where it starts with the total amounts needed and then is broken down to pounds per week, number of weeks, and the total number of animals needed to meet the supply. All right, so that is section D on livestock planning. And so now, I know it's like taking it from a fire hose, but we're gonna finish up here with section E on food safety. And food safety and a producer's inability to meet school food safety requirements was identified as a top barrier in the needs assessment that you all learned about on Monday. I believe from Lydia or Carolyn. I think Lydia presented on Monday, maybe. But we want to start this section off with a forthcoming myth-busting video and written case study to help illustrate that schools must follow state and federal standards. And there's often some confusion around the different types of food safety standards and certifications, not only on the part of producers, but buyers as well. And so in this section, we focus on the general differences between produce safety and meat processing safety. For example, we'll dive in here a little bit about FSMA and GAP certification, which are related to produce safety, while HACCP is related to meat and significant food processing. So Tammy, again, is going to bring up a video here. This is with our friend Erica Rincon at Common Ground Farm, located in New York. And here Erica talks about how the farm works with the school district in their county to come to an understanding on food safety standards.
Can you all see that okay? I know my, the wind is like howling out here, and for some reason, even though we have a fiber optic, it just doesn't seem to, it seems to slow down on a windy day. So is that looking okay?
Looks good, Tammy.
Oh, okay. Then I'll get it started.
States and different school districts have different food safety requirements depending on their own set of guidelines. We were lucky that in our school district, the Beacon City School District, that they don't require GAP certification. In lieu of that, our food service director was able to come and do a site visit where she worked through a checklist of food safety guidelines and made recommendations based on that to ensure that we had good general practices. Some of the things that she asked was that we exclude animals from our field, which we do with our metal deer fence, and also from our pack shed that has a roof over it. She also asked that we use an organic disinfectant in our wash water and that we stop using wet burlap to cover our crops in the walk-in cooler. So we switched to plastic. We do still use wet burlap on some of our other products that aren't going to the schools because we want to limit our plastic use. But in general, the recommendations that she made improved our overall practices anyway, and it was really good relationship building with her to ensure that there was trust between the food service director and the farmers. The farm to
All right, thanks, Tammy. It did get a little pixelated, but the audio seemed clear, so hopefully you all got the message from Erica. We'll transition back here. Got a few more slides to go. All right, back on track. So after producers listen to the video about Common Ground Farm, or possibly you may all have a video from a state or regional farm that you can share, facilitators should talk about some of the common food safety requirements. As a reminder, the School Food Authority may not have specified requirements. It may lean on the federal and or state food safety requirements. But as you all know, every school is different. So a couple of important things I want to point out here. First, on slides 42 through 43, one is that schools that set specific food safety requirements or vendor qualifications, they should be addressed in the solicitations. Second is to remind producers to review any state-specific food safety standards and to be familiar with the federal standards. And finally, this may be a good time to encourage farmers to do their homework and in researching any differences in food safety requirements between direct to school sales versus selling through a distributor who may require more extensive food safety requirements. So making sure they do that homework and aligning, what works best for them and their farm as they manage towards their goals. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, institutions are going to require some level of product liability insurance. It's just as or even more important than having insurance is to prove that the food the school is purchasing has been handled in a safe manner. In other words, institutional markets need to know that the food they buy from farmers is not going to make their customers sick, especially school children. For the purposes of this training, it would be good to share some of the commonly used food safety acronyms, and there are several, and what they mean for producers that want to sell to schools. Having the producers understand the differences in these certifications and regulatory programs should help them better communicate with school buyers. Thus, this section touches on the different standards and certifications. And just to go over sort of the big ones here, first is FSMA, which is the Food Safety Modernization Act, and it is administered by the FDA, not the USDA. And this is mandatory unless you meet one of the exemptions that you all need to familiarize yourselves with. And I should mention that you're not exempt from food safety. Everyone has to follow food safety because if anything happens, it can shut down a business. But there are exemptions based on the amount of record keeping, costs associated with registration and compliance. So there are exemptions based on location and sales within a state that could benefit or impact how a farm scales up to sell to schools. The next sort of acronym I want to focus on is GAP, or Good Agricultural Practices. And these are a voluntary set of food safety guidelines designed to help farmers handle food safety from the farm all the way to the market. This includes developing a food safety plan, training employees, and documenting farm practices to reduce the risk of potential pathogens in farm products. You may have also be aware of Group GAP, which is a USDA farm food safety program that allows farmers, food hubs, and marketing organizations of all sizes to band together and pool resources to achieve GAP certification. I really like how it's worded on the USDA Group GAP website, where it says Group GAP is helping more farmers supply fresh local produce to institutional markets and providing buyers and consumers alike with more purchasing and product options. All right, and I also have here on the slide 44, HACCP, which stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. This is a procedural system for food processors, including meat, to ensure procedures are in place to prevent people from getting sick. There are certifications and trainings for HACCP, and most folks that are outlining a HACCP plan are required to be federally, state, or third-party inspected. And on a final note regarding sort of these food safety measures is that this should also have a positive impact on the quality of the product, in addition to protecting the consumer's health. Okay, and if you're working with primarily crop producers, slide 46, which you can see here, can be omitted. This is based on meat and food safety. The same goes for slides 30 through 32 regarding livestock planning. And when including this slide, it's important to recognize that most meat producers take their product to a state or USDA licensed processor. And so I'd like to highlight, you can see there the ATRA publication titled Working with Your Meat Processor, which provides communication tools to get the cuts of meat that a school might be interested in. I also want to mention that all of us who have worked on this curriculum understand how in-depth food safety trainings can be. And so I want to suggest that you refer producers to the amazing resources that your state most likely has and to get familiar with state-based resources. Many of you have extension offices on your team, as well as perhaps Produce Safety Alliance certified trainers, and this is great. If you do not, perhaps consider engaging with them to talk about state-based training programs. If those resources are not available in your state, you can find many great resources on the National Farm to School Network website, as well as on NCAT's ATRA program website, where I know we have a food safety page on the ATRA website that includes a tutorial, videos, podcasts, as well as other tools to help producers understand food safety and how to write a food safety plan. And one resource we definitely want to highlight regarding school-based food safety, which is both in the producer and facilitator digging deeper sections, is the Oklahoma Farm to School food safety page. And you can see there's a link at the top of the page here, and I believe Tammy's going to put it in the chat. But if you follow the link on the slide or in the chat function, you'll be able to see that there are lots of resources for producers here. I encourage you all to check out one that is titled Tips, Tools, and Guidelines for Food Distribution and Food Safety. All right, and we finish up the food safety section with an applied activity. And this is related to sort of a risk assessment, which is located on page 100 of the facilitator guide. And the assessment helps to outline a food safety plan. You may suggest that producers share the mitigation strategy outlined in the assessment with school buyers. And to make things easy, this is an online fillable PDF. And so it can be filled out and then emailed or printed off to school buyers to show them a farm's food safety risk mitigation strategy. This is mainly for crop producers, as livestock producers typically work with their meat processor to ensure food safety protocols are met. And as I mentioned a few slides ago, the ATRA publication, Working with Your Meat Processor, is a great tool to refer your livestock producers to. Okay, well, that's the Cliff Notes version of Module 4, and it's a lot to cover on business, production, and food safety planning. As with the other modules, trainers should prompt producers to use these assessment questions, which are located on page 100, to help frame their next steps and short-term goals in their action plan. The essential questions we want producers to have a basic understanding based on Module 4 include understanding their break-even price or cost of production for the products they intend to sell to schools. We want to talk about the weak link on the farm and identify it, and that is what's preventing them from scaling up or being successful for school sales. To having an understanding of some of the resources available to help develop a production plan, and in working backwards from the school solicitation. And finally, understanding food safety and how to communicate with buyers about their food safety practices. And here's just looking at the case studies that are included in Module 4. We went over 3 of them. The one we did not talk about today is the Beef to School from Bear Paw Meats. So that is located in the guide as well as on the online resources. And to finish up, just as Margot had mentioned, in module 3 that many of the principles discussed in this module are general to all producers, and there's not a lot of regionalization prompts in the facilitator guide. So this is an opportunity, and we suggest regionalization through producer profiles and to focus on examples of the types of enterprises that are unique to your region and your audience to highlight at your trainings. So we've made it through module 4. And I just want to thank you all so much for your time, and I hope you have found this information helpful. And I'm happy to take any questions, but my contact information is also listed on the screen. So if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Andy, I have a quick question. First of all, thank you for joining us today. It's clear that this is an area of expertise of yours, and I know I personally am not an expert in this area, and I learned a lot from you today, and I look forward to digging in. I couldn't help but notice that you actually shared some insights like above and beyond what the actual facilitator notes shared, and I think that is because you're such an expert in this area. And I also got a ping on this from someone from one of our states, and I was wondering if there's any way that perhaps your speaker notes could be shared with the group, because I know I personally found them helpful in addition to the facilitator notes in our facilitator guide.
Well, that's an excellent point, Andrea, and thank you so much. I always feel uncomfortable when someone uses the word expert, but I would be happy to figure out how we can do this. I would want to just keep in mind that this is being recorded, and so you all do have access to the recording. But I would be happy to maybe create a cheat sheet or some type of sheet of some of the maybe more personal comments and experience that I shared. And then we could
Yeah.
And I'd like to just add that, so this is where, Andy had mentioned in the very beginning that this is an area where when you're thinking about your team, like who is on the team and who might be a good fit to like cover the content of this particular module. And I did see Stephanie say that, well, this is a lot to cover in just one module. And I totally agree. I could see this just being like kind of a standalone training, like the business practices for selling to schools or, business and production planning. And I did see that the Montana team had a colleague of mine, Tommy Bass. I don't think he's here today, but so he's like does this kind of business planning piece. So just thinking about like extension or producer-based organizations in your state that can cover some of these details, we definitely encourage that.
And I think tomorrow, Tomas is going to talk about opportunities for us to assist with trainings after this training for your producer training. So keep that in mind as well, that we're available to assist with technical assistance and also helping deliver your producer trainings.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you.
I have a question, if that's okay.
You bet.
I'm sure we'll be kind of chatting about this with our groups, and of course thinking about it on a state-by-state level. But I'm just curious if you have any tips for or best practices for covering the different types of producer groups. So, I'd hate to have a livestock producer have to sit through crop production planning when it is completely irrelevant to their business, and it's not, unless they're interested in diversifying their business into a totally different realm. I think they would feel like, why am I sitting through this? So I'm just curious if the intent is like to divide up into breakout sessions and like just livestock producers attend that section, and you have the like fruit and vegetable producers attend a different session and you go over that, or is the intent to just cover it all together? Or I guess the third option is just like have host trainings that are specific to like a particular producer group.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I definitely want to leave time for Lacey and Tammy to address this as well. My take is that I think there are certain topics that can be covered regardless of the type of enterprise, but I think the value is really into peer-to-peer learning through like enterprises. So I think, as you mentioned, it doesn't make sense for a crop producer to sit through livestock planning. Um, so tailoring it to maybe if it's a 2-day training, having what's available for the full group, but also making sure that there's opportunities for breakouts or separate trainings based on separate enterprises. And on that note, I would also say for myself, one of the things I sort of come into trainings and working with producers is to meet them where they're at. So here we're talking a lot about scaling up, understanding their numbers, but there's just so much going on in the farming world that a farmer has to manage, that it's just important to recognize that and make sure we're meeting them where they're at, we're encouraging them, they're doing a good job. But now let's talk about schools and opportunities here. How that fits in, again, going back to whole farm planning and what they're managing towards. But yeah, I want to, if Tammy or Lacey, if you have any thoughts as well.
Sure. I think, well, one thing we've learned, and as we've kind of been doing this training with other folks, is thinking about really the kind of versatility of options of how the different segments could be presented to. Are there sections that could be really applicable to in-person and supporting, a large network of producers? And then maybe is there an accompanying videoed segment or an online or a webinar? So really maybe creating some flexibility in how the different pieces are presented to make them either broadly accessible and support that networking, or if they're a little more specified, accessible to producers in a different way. So we've heard a lot of states kind of talking about taking these maybe mixed modality approaches of in-person and online, and maybe some recordings and some live. So I think that could be a good opportunity to support that accessibility of different types of information, and then bringing together different groups of farmers too.
Yeah, that's a really great point about the different modalities, Lacey. And I think, as we worked on developing module 4, it was one of those things where we thought it would be like a more of a pick and choose which slide decks, slides to use based on the type of producer that you're working with. And so that, of course, begs the question, like, well, how are we going to know what the producer makeup is going to be before our training? So that might be an issue that you would have to address as trainers. But and then thinking about if you have a very diverse group of producers, breaking it up into I think there were a few sections where we suggest breaking up by enterprise within the training.
Thank you.
I would say one final note on that too is just to make sure you're not presenting information, just enough information to get a producer in trouble. That as you think about the importance of these sections, you've got to provide the full picture, and that's really critical. And hopefully that makes sense. All right. Well, there's no other questions. I just want to thank you all again for your time today. And like I said, I'm available if you do have any questions. Don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the training.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us today, and for helping us at least begin to digest module 4. So we are actually going to go into, we're just right on time today. So we are going into a break. we are on the home stretch. This is the very last module, the conclusion. So let's just get into it. And if y'all don't mind, I'm just gonna turn off my, I'm just having some internet issues, so I'm gonna turn off my videos. So this is the module where we, where we're basically wrapping everything up and following along. The conclusion starts on page 101 of the facilitator guide. And if you want to turn to page 51 of the producer workbook. Like all the other modules, this page in the facilitator guide includes just a brief overview of the conclusion, the curriculum outline, and some background information, including some digging deeper resources and a link to the slide deck file. So the producer workbook prompts producers to start thinking about and reviewing their action planning guide and checklists. So as shown in that outline, and I'm not gonna have you go all the way over to page 17, but if you're referring to the outline on page 17, you can see that, we're wanting folks to really start thinking about that, their next steps and their action planning. And also there's a section here, if you'll notice, for those post-training evaluations, that's section C. And that's where we'll be hearing from Lydia tomorrow about the evaluation. So there is a little, you should account for just a little bit of time as you're starting to wrap up the training for producers to fill out an evaluation. And as many of you who have trained producers know, this is not anything new. We typically try to do some kind of evaluation to just gauge how much they've learned. And so materials needed for the action planning, for the conclusion include that action planning guide as well, which is in Appendix A. It's on that next page in the producer workbook, and then a postcard for that final activity. And then of course, the survey that we just talked about. So jumping into the slides, and now we're on page 102 of the facilitator guide and slides 2 and 3 of that conclusion slide deck. And up to this point, producers have used their action plan to just, think about their goals and their motivations and identifying some immediate next steps for moving forward with selling to schools. And as this has obviously been a thread throughout the entire training, but this is the place where we want producers to start thinking about tying all of those pieces together and all of those notes they've been taking on their action plan, and thinking about those next steps that they're going to take to start selling to schools. So the next couple of slides, slides 4 through 5, provide an opportunity for you to talk about the goals of the conclusion for producers to finish their action plan and to complete that post-training evaluation. So this may be also a good time to recap some of those key takeaways and the content that they've learned throughout the training. And as we've been talking about over the last couple of days, there's lots of different ways and variations upon how you're going to utilize the materials. So that's going to be up to you to recap and talk about how to, what's next. So there are some talking points on page 102 for slide 5, summarizing each module, but like all other aspects, you should feel free, and we encourage you to adapt based on what you've actually been able to cover in the training. So after the training recap, this section really we just dive right into the action planning. And so slides 7 and 8 structure time for producers to look over those action plans, make edits, ask questions. You could do a small group sharing. And as Aubrey was pointing out, like, how do you accommodate for different enterprises? And this might be another place where you would group folks by similar enterprises. And this really just depends on how much time. Obviously, we've fire hosed you, and and you'd probably be fire hosting the producers with all this information. So, but we definitely encourage you to build some time here so that so the producers that you're teaching, can have some time to reflect about what they've learned on the training. And it's actually a really good time and opportunity for producers to articulate what they plan on doing next in regards to selling to schools. So this tying it all together table that you're seeing here, you can see that on page 61, and it's the final page or section of the school business action planning guide. And it also corresponds with slide 9 of the slide decks. If you want to look at some of the talking points associated with it, you can see that in the facilitator guide on page 103. And so as you recall, there's time at the end of each module to review those check-ins and put some information in the action planning table. And the tying together table attempts to pull together all of those components. So to reconcile some of the stuff that they've been writing down or jotting down in their action plan up to this point, and just have it all in one spot for producers. And note here, we've borrowed heavily from the Lean Canvas principle. I'm not sure if you folks are familiar with that business planning principle, but it can actually be super useful for producers to utilize as they're considering like a new market channel or enterprise. It's not like a detailed 20-page business plan, but it does help producers get in one page some of the things they need to think about when they're entering into this new market channel, which is selling to schools. So you'll see the table includes a column for producers to identify that market channel. That's that first column there, whether they're just going to go direct to the school or if they're going to go through a distributor or some kind of aggregator like a food hub. And choosing one doesn't really preclude the others, but you may want to encourage producers to focus on just one for the purposes of this particular process. And maybe they would want to go back and do this for some of the other channels that are listed here. The next column, the values pitch column, is what we all exercise today, right? So what makes our product different and unique, and how are they going to pitch that to the school or the market channel that they're choosing to pursue? And then the following columns are just similar to the way we've structured your trainer action plan, is identifying those key resources and next steps, the key products and key partners that actually need to be put in place in order to move forward with selling to schools via that market channel that the producers that you're working with have identified. And ideally, these resources, products, and partners and all of that have already been identified on that action planning table, and they're just kind of summarizing it within this tying it all together piece. And as we'll learn tomorrow, we have a lot of, we can help, our team can help in identifying some of those key resources if producers get stuck. And one thing I did want to mention for a deeper dive into how to support trainers in using this action planning tool, I did mention it earlier on, I think on the first day. We do have a recorded training, and it actually, I can't remember who asked if we had a filled out action plan, and we actually do have some samples of an action plan that's been filled out in that training. And so I'm going to try to capture that and share it as a resource. And thanks, Lacey. I see you put that action planning recording in the chat. So yeah, just if you're still kind of struggling on how to utilize this resource for producers, feel free to check that resource out. So once producers had really finalized, at least for now, their action plans, and maybe you've had it like a group share out, or you've had producers like kind of present on that canvas or that tying it all together section, it's time for a final activity. And we recommend some sort of activity that celebrates the end of the training and can also support producers to hold themselves accountable and keep them motivated to actually following through on those action plans. So the suggested activity here is for producers to send themselves a postcard that won't arrive until either 6 months or a year later. And producers will be asked to address a postcard to themselves with a goal or a couple of goals for where they see themselves in a year. And so as trainers, you'll collect them and mail them at a later date. And you might want to ask producers if there is time to share the postcard text with the whole group if they feel comfortable. And, you know, we anticipate this would take like 10, 15 minutes if people are actually sharing back. And then the instructions for this are on the bottom of page 103 and slide 10. Are there any closing activities that you've used? Oh, and then Aubrey, this was Aubrey's idea, huh? All right, so are there any other closing activities that you folks have used? Feel free to put them in the chat or go off mute. All right, well, I can tell we're starting to get a little tired here. All right, well, if you think of anything to share as a group, you know, we're trying to learn from each other. So if any, oh, Andrea says she likes to ask folks to share one word summarizing how they're feeling. So yeah, that's a great one too. Yeah, but feel free. Oh, Jessica.
I'll share. It's kind of a little, it's a play off of a concept that we, you know, this whole R&D, rip off and duplicate concept that we all take on. There was a training that one of my chefs attended that was all about it was called Emergenics. But the way they closed that training that we have now started implementing into our trainings is at the very end, everyone kind of groups into these, you know, small groups, and they have about 10 minutes to effectively craft a poem, a song, or a skit that summarizes what they learned in the training. And then they come up and they present it. And it's been really cool and fun to see what everybody comes up with. It's really quite exciting. And it's something that we don't film so that people feel, you know, comfortable getting up and speaking. And it's very much set up in a way to where if you aren't comfortable speaking in front of a crowd, you set up your group to where you at least have to do something, like maybe you're holding a marker and that's like your tambourine or something along those lines, and you don't have to actually sing. So try to make it as inclusive as possible, but that's been a lot of fun.
Great idea, Jessica. Thanks. Yeah, so lastly, we had that evaluation piece. And like I said, Lydia is going to be talking about this tomorrow. And there's actually 2 post-training evaluations, as you can see. There's one just directly at the end of the training, and then there's one that occurs 6 to 12 months later, just to see if producers have actually gone through and implemented some of the things that they've said they were going to do in that initial post survey. So and there is a link that is on page 104 of the facilitator guide, as well as in the evaluation protocol. And as we've been talking about, there's lots of adjustments and with COVID for doing producer virtual training. So there is some evaluation guidance in your green folder for actual virtual trainings. And like I said, Lydia is going to be going over this in more detail tomorrow. And so with that, that is it. That's a lot. And we are going to head into another breakout session where you all can start thinking about your own trainer action plan. And we have a few. Lacey, did you want to explain what folks need to be thinking about for this next breakout session? Or
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. And knowing the folks, again, we know folks are moving at a little different paces. So if there are conversations you need to continue from before, that's totally fine. But going into this next section, we see it as a good opportunity to jump into Jamboard number 13. And that's really about training opportunities. And as we've talked about, there's lots of opportunity to both design a training that works for the time, capacities, and resources in your state. We also think it's a great opportunity to align with maybe other trainings, other places that producers are already gathering. So Jamboard 13 there provides some prompts to help you think about what other events might be happening that this might be a good companion, accompaniment to, and then how your training might look if you want to, what it might look like to create a training within your state. It's also, if you kind of wrap up that conversation, a good time to jump into Jamboards 14 and 15 that are kind of a way to start thinking about what are the next steps that your team would want to take after you've kind of inventoried in that action planning, what your kind of knowledge base is around the content. What else do you need to know and what actions can you take in those next steps? So all those prompts are in the Jamboard. If you have any questions, feel free to jump out, grab one of us. We can answer them and help talk you through. All right, well, we are getting to the last segment of our day. You almost made it through day 3, so close to the end. But we wanted to use these last few minutes to give an opportunity to hear from each of the states about kind of where they are in this thinking and planning process. So I'm going to add the prompts to the chat box so you can see them. We're just going to go through state by state, and we'd love to hear, based on your previous conversations, kind of where you're thinking. Are there producer trainings that you might want to add this content to that you're thinking this would align with? What are you envisioning for potential producer training, or where might you want to have it? And what are the challenges that you're starting to think about and run into, knowing that probably a lot of other folks here are thinking through some of those same challenges. So we'll just run through our list here. How about Montana? Would you be willing to get us started?
I can speak for Montana. Normally Aubrey does, but I don't know where she went. So I will be the spokesperson now. Oh yeah, there she is. She just messaged me. Anyways, we talked a lot about, luckily we have a Montana Team Nutrition OPI grant to do 2 trainings, hopefully one in the fall and the spring, which is exciting that we already have some funding and teams being formed for the trainings. Definitely snags that we're talking about. It's already been mentioned in previous days, but kind of maneuvering how producers could take 2 days off of their farm to attend a meeting like this. So potentially doing some recordings or making it more accessible virtually as well. That's kind of some of the solutions we've come up with, but we also have been talking about doing one on each side of the state. So there's one kind of on the western side, maybe around Missoula area, and one on the eastern side, maybe around the Billings area. Obviously, this is all very idealistic at this point, but we're excited and planning. So that's where we're at right now. Thanks.
Thanks, Lizzie. And yeah, thanks for sharing some of those problem solving too. I'm sure that's helpful for folks thinking through. How about Wyoming? Would you be willing to share?
I'll talk for Wyoming, not that there's a whole lot. We're a very, very small team, and we talked about a lot of the things that we could go and maybe directions we could go. But I know Leanne is the whole training won't be done, but there are a few meetings that she's gonna try to get, some pieces and parts in to get the word out to the producers, kind of thing. I think this is going to be a lot of work for us because we have such a small team, and at the state, I'm the only farm to school person, so this is kind of a little overwhelming for us. Definitely something we were excited about, but kind of got to get my mind wrapped around it first.
Thanks, Nicole. And it looks like Leanne added to the chat box around adding to the Food Coalition annual meeting as a buyer-grower meeting and integrating in evening meetings over the slower time for growers. So thanks for thinking that through. And yeah, we know it's a lot, but hopefully there are pieces, you can pull, even if you may not be in a position to do a full training. We hope that this content will maybe fit into some of those places that you're seeing already. How about Nebraska?
Oh, hold on. Try it again. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'm not Margaret. I'm Sarah. But we are in a space together in person, which is amazing for us. We've been able to bounce things off and ask questions of each other as we've gone throughout the training. For our team, our state, you guys can all snap in our region that our state is so large. We want to make sure that we're covering as much of the state as possible when we do these trainings. And we do know that we have a heavy Latino population that are typically really small farmers, and we want to target them and learn from them and see how we can modify the training to fit their needs. And this would be out in Western Nebraska, where we really focus on that with our Latina trainer and ability to translate as needed and modify as needed. So we do know we want to do that. And we also have an opportunity where in February, we have our Nebraska Sustainable Ag Society hosting a conference, and it turns out that it's going to be co-hosted with Nebraska Extension with their Regional Food Systems Initiative. And there's always a farm to school track there. So we're trying to figure out if we could introduce the training and plan to roll it out, maybe do something, we didn't talk about this, but maybe we could do the modules virtual first as soon as possible, those first months during February when producers might be available. And we also have our Department of Ag doing a specialty crop conference tied into that in February too. And we don't always have the Department of Ag involved in our trainings. And so this could be a good way to use their expertise there. So we know those two. We also have a great opportunity with a partner organization and one of our trainers from Omaha. Well, several of our trainers are in Omaha, but to hit the urban population and to really focus on outreach to BIPOC populations there. So that's also a focus where we'll be working with new and beginning growers there. So, and that doesn't talk about the central part of our state, but we have plans for that too.
That's great, Sarah. Sounds like it's been some productive time there. And a couple of areas I'll highlight that we're hoping to be able to provide some additional technical assistance in an ongoing way is one, as folks are implementing their trainings and maybe translating resources or adapting resources to specific cultural or language groups, we hope we will be able to capture that from across the country and share that out. So building on what other states are doing, and to Aubrey's point in the chat box, also being able to keep connected states that are implementing, creating opportunities for folks to see it in action and sharing their learnings from those as folks are rolling it out. So we hope to be able to continue to share that. Thanks for sharing all that, Sarah. How about North Dakota?
I can share for North Dakota, Jan with Extension. Oh, sorry, Deb.
No, go ahead.
Okay. We have an annual local foods conference that kind of comes from our statewide Farmers Market and Growers Association that also partners with Department of Ag. So we're thinking of ways to kind of connect onto that. Oftentimes they'll have like a panel for farm to school or some sort of info about that. So thinking about that. We were also kind of throwing around the idea of doing like an introduction virtually in like January or February, like a lunch and learn kind of a setup to kind of grab some of those producers who are interested, but maybe have more questions than they have answers. So we're looking at doing something like that. Some snags that we're looking at. One of our members who's in the training this week is also a producer, and she reminds us that anything more than an hour or 90 minutes is going to be really hard for producers. So trying to kind of think about chunks or what producers can meaningfully take away in those shorter bits of time without making folks think like they have to complete an entire series or training or be certified to participate in Farm to School.
That's great. Thanks, Jan, for lifting up those different options and also, some of the clarity on marketing and clarity on communication that needs to come with that too. How about Kansas?
Sorry, I had to step away for a second. I just heard you say Kansas. This is Caitlin with the Kansas Rural Center. Some of the places that we think that we could implement this are, we have these things called growing growers that are for beginning farmer trainings. So we think that we could weave this in a little bit there. We also were thinking that we could do kind of an intro to beginning producers. So start with module 1, and then maybe the following year, people might be ready to tackle the rest, but maybe not doing all of it at once. So trying to figure that out, also trying to figure out how we can make this a little more regionalized, hyper-regionalized. So working with some of our food policy councils, perhaps, to have things be a little bit better with school district needs and just have those conversations be a little bit more specific to the local needs. Yeah, I think that's kind of where we landed with what we would do for now, and just trying to figure out the balance between in-person versus virtual, because we found that for a lot of our producers, things are more impactful for them in person, but also the time commitment to do it in person and the access across the state. Virtual obviously allows us to have greater access. So trying to figure some of that out.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, and I appreciate you lifting up those food policy council as potential partners. I want to make sure that we got, was there anybody from any of the states that we'd previously touched on that wanted to share anything else? Wanted to make sure we're inclusive, but if anybody wanted to add anything from Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, or North Dakota before we buzz along. I think Lizzie did a great job for Montana. Thanks, Lizzie. Thanks, Aubrey. All right. Well, then let's buzz to Missouri.
This is Lexi from Missouri, and I was kind of the only one on this one. Everybody else had to leave. So some of my thoughts for where we could hold, I didn't really know where a lot of producers went in our state. I'm fairly new to this. So I know we have some farmers markets regional meetings, and I thought maybe we could put some of the information in those meetings, maybe a little snippets in our senior farmers market nutrition program that we have, and then the WIC program, just to get those producers kind of the bug in their ear about it. And hopefully I kind of like the idea Aubrey threw out there, maybe if Kansas is doing one, since we could do like Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, something close like that, just for some of the ideas I came up with.
Great, thanks, Lexi. How about Colorado?
We didn't. I think we're both looking at each other. Who's going to talk? I'll talk, Jess. So in Colorado, thanks to Nourish Colorado, a nonprofit here, and along with CDE School Nutrition, we've been hosting workshops called Low Pro Co, Local Procurement Colorado. We started in 2018, 2019. And so those have developed into now a series, it's a 3-series workshop that will take place over the course of a year. They're regional workshops. And so I think we're just so excited to have some of this amazing content to fill in some of our gaps. And it aligns with our curriculum and content that has already been made. And so there's just ways that we're just going to be able to pull and plug. And I think really expand the breadth of our training to our producers. And I will say that our training specifically has food service directors and producers in the same room. And so we're just kind of thinking about how the flow will work and how breakouts will work. And another amazing part about this training is that there's a culinary track. And so food service staff that actually cook in the kitchens come and they spend time in the kitchen learning the best way to break down butternut squash, right? And really taking ownership of farm to school at that level, because they're the ones cooking and touching the product, and involves recipe reading, recipe development. Anything else, Jess, that I left out?
That was pretty comprehensive, Becca. I won't take the floor from you.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. I love it. It sounds like it's just going to integrate and weave in so well. That's wonderful to see those pieces coming together. And finally, South Dakota.
I can speak for South Dakota. I'm Cinda Fry with the Department of Education. We spoke about a lot of different opportunities. There's like ranching for profit. We talked about Dakota Rural Action, the farm beginning. Anna is on another conference, but SDSU extension trainings and kind of signing her up for those. We even talked about like farmers markets and being able to market this training to those resources, along with even maybe an event at the stock show when people come to South Dakota, state fairs and county fairs, seeing if, maybe we can host a room for 4 hours, 1 day or 2 days, just because we know everyone's going to be there for those areas. And Intertribal Buffalo Council for the protein component, along with Intertribal Agricultural Council. So we spoke about a lot of different opportunities, nothing yet that we have definite, but a lot of ideas roaming around. Joanna, Fanny, is there anything else?
I think maybe some of our snags might just be like which probably every state in our region here faces, but like we're such a diverse state of producers and schools, we have private, public, BIE, combinations of both. So those are maybe some of the snags.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks for sharing that. It sounds like, because a lot of you are experiencing some of those same challenges, it'll be great to continue to connect with other states as they're working these out, and we can continue to help build those connections and see how those snacks can help to start resolve and what it looks like in action. So thanks everybody for sharing and for all of your work today. I know we're getting to past midweek and we are getting to the tail end. We've got one more day tomorrow
we have got a really exciting virtual site visit to share with you. We'll start to think about the outreach and promotion toolkit and dig into that. And you will have more time with your teams to start to think about what happens next. Most importantly, though, we also have our costume contest. So don't forget to wear your costumes tomorrow. If you're a facilitator and you have a couple of minutes to hang on, we'd love to check in with you to see how things are going in your state and how we can support you. But otherwise, we will see you all tomorrow. Thank you for being here.